Well, I'm going to start the recording now. And good evening, folk. I'm Joan Van Beesler, Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice, Ohio. And I am just really thrilled that you came out for this discussion tonight about something that's incredibly important. And we're going to be welcoming Paisha Thomas with the Ohio Faith in Public Life. And Paisha, just wave hi to folk. They can see your picture there. And Chelsea Fuller, who's with Movement for Black Lives out of DC. That's right, Chelsea?
I live in Columbus.
Oh, you live in Columbus too? Okay. For some reason, somebody said you were DC. But
yeah, that was my fault. She's out. She's from DC, but here with us. So
absolutely.
I'm from Ashtabula, actually. I'm from Ohio.
Oh, I love Ashtabula.
At least somebody does.
Preached up there quite a few times, but wonderful, absolutely wonderful to have you here and holding this discussion with our folk here in the Columbus area, in the Central Ohio area. And yes, we are a bunch of Unitarian Universalists. To just get us centered as we start tonight, before I turn it over to Paisha and Chelsea, I want to share just a short quote from John Lewis. John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, once said that nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. Why, he said? It's because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet. So thank you for being that dynamic link to the divine. And I'm going to turn it over to Paisha and Chelsea.
That's excellent. Thank you, Joan. And like we all know, this is Chelsea, and Chelsea's been very, very helpful in my journey to learn more about ways that we can create a more just financial path for our community here in Columbus. And so I've just been really, really blessed to be able to collaborate with her. So Chelsea, thank you for joining us. Yeah, you're welcome. If you guys want to just to save time, unless somebody has a burning introduction, I'd like to have you introduce yourselves in the chat. And just what I like to do for this centering moment is just to have you spend a few seconds saying how you're showing up at this meeting tonight. I'll start with Amanda, and then Amanda, you can pass it on to the next person until we're finished.
Oh, I see. We're going to say out loud how we're coming into the meeting tonight, and then we're going to type our introductions in the, okay, thanks. All right. Honestly, I'm pretty tired, but I'm excited to be here and really grateful that this is happening. I will pass it on to Dana.
Okay. I am a retired UU minister and interested in this topic. Let's see, what else can I say about myself? I come to this from just a whole lot of different lenses, involved in a lot of congregation-based community organizing in both Atlanta and in Minnesota.
Who do you want to pass it to?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Elise. Let's see. Pat, I will pass it along to you.
I'm just starting this journey with a group. I've done more things personally and professionally, and some things with groups, but not so much here in Columbus.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm Sarah Jane, please.
I'm coming back to this. Early on professionally, I was involved in juvenile corrections and community-based corrections, getting kids out of jail and reformatories. Also went into working with mental health issues, which ended up a lot of corrections issues. So this is like a coming back for me. Joan.
Okay, thanks, Sarah Jane. Yeah, Joan Van Beesler. And as I said, I'm director of UU Justice Ohio and a semi-retired Unitarian Universalist minister here in Columbus. And right now I'm kind of just limping along because I got my first COVID-19 vaccination today and I'm not having a great reaction. So I kind of feel crappy and look crappy, but I'm happy in my heart that I got it. So I'm doing well and really interested in this topic, and I want to hear the wisdom of Paisha and Chelsea on this one. And I'm going to pass it to Isabel.
Thank you, Joan. I'm Isabel. I'll introduce myself in the chat. I think that was the request. And I'll say today I'm feeling well rested and connected, increasingly connected to this area, Central Ohio, and just very glad to be able to learn more. And I will pass it to Jan.
I am I'll introduce myself in the chat, but I'm good this evening. I've had a good day, got some good exercise, got outside, little sunshine, a couple of dog walks, and got to actually even practice my fiddle a little bit this afternoon. So
I didn't know you played fiddle, so thanks for that info.
Thank you. And I will pass it to Danya.
Hi, I'm Danya. I'm sitting down to dinner, so I'm going to not share my video here in a few minutes, but I'm here, I'm listening. We're listening to a book tape called Cast, and we've just been on this journey to learn more and just trying to learn more about this topic and all topics, but especially, just trying to understand other perspectives and see how I can help.
Looks like we have three more.
Pass it to somebody, right?
Mm-hmm. Ken, John, and the 614 number hasn't gone. Neither has Chelsea.
How about Chelsea? Well, hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Fuller. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Columbus, Ohio. I work for a firm called Blackbird that supports racial justice movements and organizations fighting for Black liberation and justice for impacted people here in the US and abroad. But I'm from Ohio. I lived in DC for a long time, which is why people get confused. I am new to Columbus. I've only been here for a few years. And I do really look forward to being in conversation with you all and have been just as blessed by Paisha's experience here in Columbus in terms of finding community and figuring out ways to bring my work in the national sphere here to Columbus in a way that impacts the work of local organizers and can support and amplify the work of Black people here in the community. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm coming into the space open, ready to learn, ready to teach, ready to be an active listener. I am a little bit headachy, so if you see me drinking water and possibly rubbing ointment on my neck, it's because I have a bit of a headache. But I'm coming into the space really grateful and feeling hopeful about a lot of things in this moment, which is a blessing. So I will pass it to whoever hasn't gone.
And thank you, Chelsea, for being here even with the headache. I know how that's hard, so thank you.
John, Ken, and Chris are left. And someone else has just joined us. Oh no, there's John. You're in two places, John. Okay.
Let's see. Well, that's because I was trying to get my my iPad to come up so I could share my video. So I'm glad to be here, and I just saw this in the announcements for First UU, and I'm definitely curious about social justice and police reform. So looking forward to this experience.
And Ken and Chris have not yet gone.
I'll go. My name is Ken, and I've been working in the last couple of months a little bit more with the BREAD organization in the matter of police reform, and also the civilian or civic ID for Columbus One ID. And just long-time activist. I work amongst very conservative populations, but I'm glad to be a canary in the coal mine. I come with gratitude and interest.
Thank you, Ken. It looks like Chris, you're the last one here.
Hi, I'm Chris Jones-Levy, and I am a retired UU community minister. I'm here with a bit of physical and emotional fatigue tonight. My youngest brother had a massive heart attack on Monday, and had quintuple bypass surgery on Wednesday. It was a little bit touch and go for a couple of days, but he's doing better. So I was able to attend the meeting, but it's been kind of an exhausting week. I am, certainly interested in this topic. I've done some things with UUJO, and I'm currently in a white women's book group trying to learn more about our privilege and learn more about how we can be better citizens and walk alongside the people who are leaders in this movement. So this looks like a good opportunity to put some of that into practice.
Yes, it is, Chris, and thank you. And I'm sorry to hear about your brother. Glad that he's on his way to recovery.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So that's exactly why we're here. We, as you know, Faith in Public Life launched a racial justice campaign here in Columbus around defunding police. We've all been aware of the allergies that that people have around the semantics of what is really a call to action and is actionable items that we can engage in, actionable actions like behaviors. Thank you. that we can engage in to help move our city toward one that liberates Black people in a time where the community is calling for that. And so the way that we talk about that is through budgeting and finance in our city and where it can go to help bring about this liberation and to end state-sanctioned violence against Black people through minimizing the opportunities for police to be able to do that. And so I think it was Ken who said, you work among a lot of conservative people. So we know some of the arguments out there that exist, but we also have seen successes across our country that we can look at where people are practically applying this concept to their world. So I don't know if you guys saw, but the city of Austin used some of the money that they diverted away from an excessive police budget to purchase a hotel and make it housing for marginally housed and unhoused people. So this isn't, I think we know the arguments around like, my nephew, are you trying to take his job or cut his salary in half? This isn't that. This is, we're literally like removing excess from someplace that doesn't need it or uses it or mishandles it. And we're putting it somewhere where our neighbors can have a better chance at survival. So when we're looking at justice and what is right and just, we know that budgets are moral documents. And so how can we help? How can we organize our community to help our policymakers make better decisions about the money and to create documents and budgets that are moral? And I do want to shout out Shannon Hardin today because yesterday, did anybody else get to watch the rollout on Facebook Live of the new amended Columbus City budget. So first of all, a little background in history. Faith in Public Life repeatedly reached out to Mayor Ginther to ask for a meeting to talk about ways that the mayor could participate in moral budgeting. And Mayor Ginther declined to meet with us. And in the meantime, we lost two more dear souls in Columbus, Ohio. That was Casey Goodson Jr. and Andre Hill. Still, we reached out to the mayor. He still refused to meet with us. But to his credit, Council President Shannon Hardin did agree to meet with us and brought a few people with him for that meeting. And Faith in Public Life is playing a supportive role to the community, meaning we hear what community activists are asking for because they're the ones that are out here, fighting the fight and engaging with families who have lost loved ones at the hands of Columbus police and their aggression. And so one of our activists, Jasmine Ayers, had done a Facebook Live post back in January asking us to call for a hiring freeze. So we, as a supportive organization, took that request to City Council. And I don't know if that was the tipping point, but as you saw yesterday, if you didn't, it's in the dispatch today, that the Council President Hardin proposed that amendment in the budget to divert 2.5 of 10 million total dollars away from excessive police funding, and what they would save from doing a hiring freeze, and put that 2.5 million into anti-violence, to violence prevention, and to also education and other community services. 5 out of 7 people on council voted yes to that proposed amendment, and then 2 of the 7 voted no, and it was tabled until the 22nd for more information. But the dispatch article that came out today says that it looks like this hiring freeze is going to happen. And so why is that important? It's important because we have loads of information and data based on the audits and investigative reports about Columbus Police. A few that just came out, Matter News just released 2 articles showing where Thomas Quinlan had deliberately stalled the mayor's reforms. So because he didn't agree with them. So he on his own unilaterally decided that these reforms would not take place in this time, following a year of just hideous police aggression toward the community. And then again, a loss of two more lives. And so not only did he deliberately stall those, he lied to the community on the public facing dashboard, saying that these reforms were in progress. So we have that. We have a matrix report showing a systemic problem within the Columbus Police Department, showing that the training videos, the neighborhoods where the enemy exists, these are all Black people and Black targets. So we've got a police force which inside of it is laced with propaganda, continuously indoctrinating officers with this racist mindset. And so the proposal said that we've got this audit saying that you need to make some hiring changes. We've got this audit saying that there are multiple internal structural things that you have to change. We've got a chief who has decided not to do that and been demoted to remain within the force. You cannot, with a clear conscience, add new recruits to this corrupt system. You need to postpone this hiring, which was supposed to happen in June of this year, until you've addressed the recommendations of the audit for the hiring process and the reforms that have been, promised to our community. So I call that a win, even though it's only 2.5 of $336 million. It's still an acknowledgement financially that we need to not continue to pour money into a budget that is harming our neighbors. And so I just wanted to give you guys that as some background and kind of a celebratory moment, and then really just open up for some questions. What are some of the things that you're dealing with when you try to wrap your mind around or help other people understand this concept? And did you bring any questions with you today? Because this is our town hall moment for you to ask away if you have any.
I have a question.
I heard one person and a second person, but I didn't see where they were coming from.
Ken, and then Chris was second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I've had some technical issues. My question is, what do you know about the contribution of federal funds to the county or police departments locally or the city?
You mean like how much of that funds goes to police from federal dollars?
I would just say anything that you can, that we understand that's factual about how much the federal dollars contribute to the operational budget of the county and incidentally other police departments.
Yeah, and I don't happen to know, but I do know how to access that information by doing a public records request and by really just looking at this proposed budget that they posted on the front page, which I think you have to dig down into the budget to find how much came from federal dollars.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then Chris?
Yeah, it's not so much a question. You were saying what stumbling blocks do we come across? And I think it's the same one that I hear from other people. The term defunding police pretty much draws a knee-jerk reaction. And even explaining what that means sometimes doesn't get through because people are so stuck on, well, we can't have a society without police. What do you mean? You think you're going to go catch all the criminals yourself? So I think that term has been a real stumbling block for a lot of people. So that's just my comment.
Yeah, and what have you run into that yourself? And like, what are some of the things that you say in response to that?
Typically just try to explain what it means that, police are not trained in mental health issues and perhaps not always in de-escalating like a domestic situation, and that the funds could go towards things that would lighten the burden of the police and perhaps provide more appropriate care.
Sure. I'm going to also add a link as we're talking. I'll go get the link. It's something that I've been looking at as I reference, like what can we use as a visual aid to show people what can be done in our cities that moves away from violence against Black people, moves away from sanctioning that violence. And by state sanction, I mean like that, there's money behind that. What can move us away from that and into violence prevention? And I've been using the Breathe Act because, and I have to catch up to follow, maybe Chelsea knows about the progress on this act, but with it, if it passes, there will be money for communities to divert away from like making Black people targets and building harm reduction facilities and programs and housing and mental health and education. And for those innovative entities that are able to create those, through this act, they will be able to get funding, federal dollars, and I believe it even allocates a way for the city to be able to put money there also. So I'm gonna get that link from online. But I wanted to also ask you, Chelsea, if you have any other insights on federal dollars and police budgets.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of the Columbus police budget, but I know across the board that the way in which federal dollars are often reallocated in ways that the layperson looking at a budget may not understand or may not see kind of at a first glance, is that it is usually diverted into the section of the budget that actually is connected to militarizing the police, right? So making sure that there are militarized weapons at the disposal of the local police department. Often federal dollars are used in that regard, which then makes it easier for local police to use the talking point that taxpayer money is not going to militarize the police, right? Even though it is still it can, for some cities, be a significant portion of the budget. It has become kind of a pivot point for a lot of police that do receive federal dollars. That's not, across the board, the way that federal dollars are used in local communities, but it is one of the tactics that police use. And the militarization of police is something that, as far as I know, most US cities do have a section of their budget that allows for them to use weapons of war in moments of crisis and rapid response. And the criteria for what dictates or what is considered a moment of crisis and rapid response is up to the discretion of the local police department.
Wow, I didn't know that, that's the way around is calling it taxpayers' dollars, but I guess we could argue back that we pay federal taxes too.
Yeah, and that's, it's been called out. It may not be something happening here in Columbus, but I have not spent any time with our police budget, to be honest.
So I sent you guys a link to the budget in Columbus, and you can scroll down to where it starts to chunk out. It's a very long document, but when I wanted what I needed, I just scrolled down to where they were talking about numbers. Sarah Jane?
Yeah, in some of those things for militarized, do they require in-kind services? A lot of grants or services, there's called in-kind, and so they use hours of police. They don't use actual money, but they use services. Is that some of the stuff, the way that federal funds are used?
And that would be another public records request that we could make to find out the answer to that. I can say one thing that I noticed in June was the use of an Army military vehicle, and that we did not own. That was donated to Columbus. So, could we say that we paid for it? No, but what they did do instead was purchase one for 2021 with city budget dollars, or propose to purchase one. I'm gonna look to find the answer to the in-kind services too.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I've learned, this came from helpful conversations that I've had with Chelsea, is that we don't have to hammer in to people announcing broadly that we're defunding police. This is an action. These are ways to take action. So we don't have to call it anything out loud to other people. If we pivot the conversation to divesting and reinvesting and taking excessive funding. And if you look at, I'll put another thing in here. If you look at this pie chart and how much money goes into the police budget versus everything else, it really just starts to speak for itself. Yes, Ken, that's right. divest, reinvest, which is what the Breathe Act is also using as terminology.
Mhm. Yeah, I can actually talk a little bit about the Breathe Act and can address some of the questions that have come up so far while folks maybe figure out other questions or experiences they would like to share. So I am a communication strategist. I'm a journalist and someone who works with media and narrative a lot. So understanding the ways in which people receive information, how they retain it, how to identify narrative gaps, right? So the Movement for Black Lives, that's the ecosystem of 150 organizations around the country and abroad that was formed out of Ferguson, right? And has been for the past several years working to organize people in defense of Black lives across multiple pillars, the defunding of police being one, right? So over the summer, when we saw the killing of the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other people, we saw a lot of energy around this idea of divesting from police, right? That had already been a conversation that organizers around the country had been having for decades, right? We divest from things that do not work all the time, right? And there's no resistance to it. We divest from things in our city budgets all the time that don't work, things that are trial and error. We divest from education all the time. We divest from healthcare in different ways all the time and reinvest funds in places that folks find to be more viable for the services that need to be offered. So the resistance that people feel to this languaging around defund the police is the same resistance that folks felt in the civil rights movement when people were saying, stop the pigs, right? Or when people even said Black power, right? So we understand that there's a dissonance happening that's actually rooted and connected to people's relationship to police. And that's not just white folks, right? That's all folks who have been impacted by white supremacy in a particular way. Because if we talked about defunding a particular kind of road work, we would not be having national outcries about how cities are using their money for city infrastructure. There's this outcry because people are talking about a world where there is no police, and for better or for worse, folks have become accustomed to living in a society that does have police, right? So when we're talking about how to move people from this place of feeling immediate resistance to the language of defund into understanding it as a process, not a destination, not a full destination, right? This is happening across the spectrum, with the end goal being for people like me. And as you can see, like, I am not a reformist. I am someone who believes that we do not need institutions that are literal vestiges of slavery. We do not need institutions that were created with the sole purpose of oppressing, killing, and impacting the lives of different groups of people. So when we talk about defund, we have to start from this understanding of, like, you have a visceral reaction to this language for a reason, right? That's a starting point. Like, it's not because you have an issue with the idea of divesting funds, because we do that as citizens of this country all the time, sometimes, and we don't even know it, right? As tax-paying citizens, we are investing, divesting, our money is being invested and divested all the time. The second piece is, we're not demanding the immediate withdrawal of police from around this country. But what we are asking is that folks that have the ability to do so take the time to look at how the money is being spent. Like, this language around budgets being moral documents. People invest money in the things that they care about. That's just the truth. We do it as individuals and our organizations, institutions that we're a part of and that impact our lives. Money is invested in things that folks feel are important and valuable. So we are asking people to start by looking at how much money is being spent in your city, right? How much money is being spent on police in your school district? How much money is being spent by police in your healthcare systems? How much money is being spent by police any and everywhere that there are armed police, right? That are there to protect and serve, but really are posing a threat to particular members of our community. And from that point, you have an opportunity to expand the conversation to include all the nuance that actually is a part of the conversation. Because the end goal for people that actually do believe in abolition, that a world without the carceral system is possible, right? Abolition is about a free world where people have self-autonomy, where we have self-governance as communities of people, right? That we can make self-determined decisions about how to care for one another, how to deal with the harms that come with living in a society, and that we can create the systems of governance and protection and safety that work best for us, right? That's my personal interpretation of the values of abolition. So people who respond to you all like, well, who's going to keep us safe, right? What is then the reality though for people who have never been kept safe by police, right? So it also offers us moments and opportunities for real self-reflection, right? I, as a Black person, as a Black woman in this country, have never saw our police, our institution of policing, as something that would keep me safe. Is that to say that I can't acknowledge that there are police officers who have kept members of my community from harm occasionally? 100%. But they are a part of a system that was created to catch, patrol, kill, and oppress Black people. So when we're also inside of this conversation about divestment, people are like, well, why divestment and not reform? Reform is a narrow process that actually requires that something have worked in the first place, right? Or that something worked in the first place, was broken, and we can fix it. Our system of policing in this country works the way it was intended to work. It works the way that it was created to work. All reform has done in the history of police reform and criminal justice reform in this country has done is put bandages over wounds, and not even adhesive bandages, to be quite frank, right? If we're going to be literal, right? We have seen time and time again conversations about reform that address individual actors and that do not address the root and systemic causes. We've seen reform even in the George Floyd police reform bill that is, that the Congressional Black Caucus put out. We see what, to me and to many other people who are invested in this work, see as temporary solutions to an issue that they actually know will not be rectified through that process, right? And that has been the reality for too long. And I think that's why we saw this summer millions of people around the country and around the world actually stand up and say, we've tried reform. We have had conversations with police across this country. We have had these federal legislations put in place, and Black people are still disproportionately impacted, disproportionately murdered, and there has never been justice consistently for Black people in this country when police and the institution of policing are involved. So saying all of that to say that there are multiple points of engagement along this process and the conversation about the process to defund the police. It requires a particular kind of rigor around the messaging. If you are someone in leadership, like all of you are, you all have congregations and people that you're in service to, right? So it does take a particular kind of rigor to get people to understand that there's actually self-reflection that has to happen if you're going to be able to move to the next step of understanding why the conversation about defunding the police is necessary. And another thing that comes up is, well, if I call the police, who will come? If I call the police and we don't have police, in a moment of crisis, who's going to come, right? For millions of people in this country, most of the 911 calls that people have anywhere around this country, the most recent data that I've seen is that the majority of the people that call the police in this country are not calling because there is a violent crime happening in their home. Someone is having a mental health crisis. Someone is having a legitimate health crisis. Someone is in labor. Someone has had a heart attack, a stroke. Issues of domestic violence are also really high on the list for why people call the police. And people call the police for completely non-crime, non-health related issues in places where they do not have adequate health services, right? Or they do not have adequate rapid response EMT care for a number of reasons, right? So this conversation about, well, who's gonna show up? We need to be invested in being a part of creating the reality of who shows up, right? Like if I have a mental health crisis, an armed police officer that has not been trained in mental health is not going to help save me. And as a Black person, anytime I call the police, I'm risking my life. I'm risking the lives of the Black people that are around me. I have a family member in Ashtabula here in the state of Ohio, whose home was being burglarized by somebody that they knew. He called the police burst in the door and shot him. He's 24 and he's paralyzed, and they shot him with militarized bullets that exploded in his body on impact. He was actually calling for help. They saw him, shot him, left him there for multiple hours without care. And the person that robbed him did not even go to jail for more than 24 hours. And the police officers that shot him were not even removed from the police force. So saying all that to say, there are a multitude of reasons why the conversation about police has to be nuanced. We're not encouraging people to go in this without the lens of people's lived experiences, right? We have to figure out who is going to handle violent crime. We do have to figure out who is going to handle, who's going to show up if we call when someone is having a baby, when someone has, someone is having a heart attack, right? But that is a community-based conversation, and community-based solutions are what should be those in leadership's main priority, right? But we know that the institution of policing is a central component of the ways in which money and power move in politics. That we know the power of the Fraternal Order of Police, and we know the power of the other police unions that really dictate a lot of what happens in our communities where policing is concerned, and they do not have the best interests of our neighbors at heart. So saying all that to say, it's a process. You can move people through the conversation with some intentionality about providing nuance and interrogating why people feel the way that they feel, right? And in that process, there's an opening where we can talk about the different interventions that also are a part of what we're talking about when you hear InfraBL and when you hear other organizations talking about defunding the police. How are we looking at different relationships with police? Our school system still largely, even with all of the information that we know about the school to prison pipeline, many of our schools still have armed officers, like school resource officers, right? So if there's an unwillingness for people to have a conversation about police at the highest level, then start at the lowest level. Start with why are there police in my grocery store on East Main Street? Why are there police every time that I go into the bank? And I can go into Bexley. I can drive down the street and go to Bexley, and there's no police in the Giant Eagle Market District. I can go to my gym on another part of the town, on another part of the city, and there's no police. But if I go to the gym on East Livingston, the police are inside of the entryway, right? So there's multiple ways and entry points for us to have this conversation.
That's so overwhelming. I wonder where do you find hope, if you find any hope, any places where there are community-based solutions being actually developed, implemented, put into practice somewhere? Do you see that?
Absolutely. There are dozens of cities around the country that are actively inside of a process to figure out how to defund the police. In Austin, Texas, when you call 911, depending on the call, they have people in place to dispatch mental health crisis responders and other folks to respond to different calls for support and for help that are not based on violent crime. And I think that has been a tremendous kind of like, moment of like visibility for people in a moment to really rethink, because when you think about Texas, I don't think most people think of it as a progressive space. I don't think people think about it as a place that would actually be in favor of anything that took guns out of community and off of the street, right? But Austin has been one of the cities in this past year that really made an investment in listening to the members of their community. And that was something that they enacted, and it did not really require a lot of rigmarole, right? They found the money in the budget. They listened to community members. Community members were a part of the process in figuring out where to invest that money. And they have seen amazing results, and it hasn't been that long, right? And I think there are other places that we've seen that have had a little bit more of a national profile, places like Minneapolis, places like even cities like Chicago, which has a terrible history of racialized police violence. Even they are having conversations about defunding the police and moving money around in the city to provide more resources to teachers, to healthcare workers, to people that are working in emotional and mental health crises capacities. So there are dozens of places around the country. And the thing about the Breathe Act, Joan, that I think is really fantastic is that there's also an opportunity for there to be local Breathe Acts, right? So the Breathe Act is a national piece of legislation that is being introduced this year, but we also have seen people around the country take that, use it as a model, and create local like regional, federal. There's the federal legislation, which is the Breathe Act you have this link to, but we've also seen people do regional based and local versions of the Breathe Act. Chicago just passed one, right? And it has been overwhelming to see the support that they have had from other cities around the country that have said, like, we're going to do that too. We're going to draft a local Breathe Act, right? And see how far that we can go with this piece of legislation in our city. So there's a lot to be hopeful about. There's still a lot of work to be done, of course. But I think that if people get overwhelmed by the idea of defunding the police, it's always a great tactic to tell them where it's already happening, right? And to show people that it is incremental. It's something that we expect to take years. It took 400 plus 500 years for us to get in this mess. We're not going to get out of it overnight, right? The institution of police in this country is generations, right? Of having a particular type of experience around safety. And it's going to take people a moment to disconnect from that and to allow themselves to envision something different. Even Black people that I've talked to that live in this community and live other places, if you ask them if they want to defund the police, they would say no, even if they have had violent interactions with the police themselves or have lost people to police violence. And even if they understand the issue of systemic racism in this country, people have become so used to the fact that this is the way that it is that they are not even able to dream of something different. And I feel like it's our responsibility as people in leadership with access and privilege to help them dream of something different.
Chelsea, that's amazing. And thank you for covering especially the history of, and Dana, I see your hand, the history of policing in Columbus, in America, is why defunding is vital, because as Chelsea shared, policing is founded on instilling fear in the population of Black bodies. And so you're not going to be able to fix it to turn it into something else, because it was created to be what it is. Dana?
So I see the advantages of moving budgetary money around within a Department of Public Safety to be able to address with expertise around people having mental health issues, around domestic violence, and so forth. And I would think reallocating budget money to cover those particular aspects of public safety would be just explained in that way. A lot of people would get behind that, and it would serve to increase the sense of public safety in the community. Whereas the phrase defund the police is automatically, my perception is from watching news media sources and what have you, creates a reactionary thing that, oh, well, they just wanted to fund the police altogether, and therefore that cuts off the avenue for engagement around conversations of serious reform in policing and public safety. I think the terminology is critical to get a critical mass of movement in this direction toward toward reallocating resources. I just am concerned. I guess I'm just concerned that that the sense of language that would cause an automatic knee-jerk reaction against it would be will not help activists move toward progress.
There again, I think that's why it's important to understand that historical component and to know, I guess, at the onset what your goal is, and that it's not reform, because what is there to reform if it was created to be the system of slave catching and, as we know it now, the prison industrial complex. So what is there to reform? I think our city is inviting us to reimagine public safety. So if you're looking for rhetoric, and if you want to avoid using defund in your rhetoric, you can simply exchange that for reimagining public safety. And I'm gonna go back and pull this quote from Chelsea because it was powerful, which really just says, like, imagine, I can't find it now because I'm in a hurry, but be invested in the creation of who will show up when you call in an emergency. So you're reimagining public safety instead of a slave catching, violent, aggressive system against Black citizens in this country. You're looking at public safety instead. And what would public safety be? And then I saw Isabel and then Pat.
Can I respond directly to that just really quickly? Because I think it was important, and I actually don't know who that was speaking. But I think that's twofold, right? So like, as a narrative strategist, right, who was a part of deciding to use the language in the moment that we decided to use it, there was a clear understanding that this language and the messaging around defund would generate a particular reaction in some people. But at the time, in that moment, organizers on the ground in communities around the country decided that that was the demand. So movements committed to Black liberation and social change across the country decided to fall in line with that languaging and amplify it, because there's nothing actually more powerful, more radical, but also more honest than the actual demands of the people that are being the most impacted by something, right? So yes, the language makes certain people uncomfortable, but also something doesn't have to, we're not in the business of making people comfortable, right? Like, people that are working in service to impacted people and that are actually working to make systemic change are not working in the interest of making people comfortable. So yes, there is a spectrum of language and a spectrum of conversation that you can use to bring people into the conversation, but folks are never going to stop saying defund the police. And the response that people are going to get, more than likely, if there is not, like I said, if there's not rigor and discipline around understanding it before engaging, your immediate response is more than likely going to be from impacted people, the people that matter the most in this conversation, is that, why are we using language that makes the people comfortable who are the safest anyway, right? And I think as leaders in your community, that's some languaging that some message discipline you can also use, right? Like, yeah, sure, there are pieces of it that rub folks that are, that agitate, but what does it matter if I'm agitated, if I'm one of the safest community members that I know? What does it matter if the language actually does not feel like it's in alignment with my experience with policing, if I know that my neighbors are being killed disproportionately, and that is what they have asked us to do, right? So if you are in a pulpit, if you are in a community space where you have an opportunity to talk about it, I would encourage all of you, truly from the bottom of my heart, and as somebody of deep faith, to be bold and courageous and not shying away from the language of defund, but to open up opportunity to really dig in and talk about it. Let people ask the questions that feel gross. Let people ask, the questions that we've talked about here today, and have enough and be committed enough to sit in the discomfort. as a communication strategist, when I'm doing message training with people, including faith leaders, them having to continuously say the thing that actually feels really uncomfortable to them is sometimes the hardest thing. But once you get it, right, and it connects not only just like cognitively, but once you feel it and once it connects to your real values, because most people understand this from an experiential level, when you feel it from a place of like deep love and commitment to people in your community, the way that the conversation flows is always different, right? So if you're explaining this from someone very disconnected from it and people read that, you're never going to have the open and engaged conversation that's necessary to move people along that spectrum that I was talking about. So, you know, even acknowledging, right, like I encourage people when I do training, like we recently just did one with more than 100 faith leaders from across the country that was convened by the National NAACP. And one of the leaders, Reverend Starsky, who is a tremendous faith leader in Ferguson, was asked a very similar question. Well, like I say the word defund and my congregants just like, they don't want to hear it. There's police in my congregation, right? There were service people in my congregation and they feel disrespected by the conversation at all. They don't want to engage. And he offered that if you have to allow space for conversation in a way that allows everyone to show up, which I think most of us do, right? We're trying to facilitate conversation in our communities in a way that everyone can participate. You have to allow people to feel uncomfortable, and someone has to hold a line, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be you all that are holding the line in this particular realm, right? There's like, we're not just going to throw the language of defund out because it makes you uncomfortable. We're going to sit in that and actually talk about what this is and figure out ways to connect to it that feel right to us. Everybody's not going to be inside of this work the same way, and that's not the expectation, right? I don't expect well, first of all, y'all couldn't have this because this was made for me, but I don't expect, everyone to run around in a coat that says defund the police. But if you are someone that's committed to justice, you actually do have a responsibility to at least have the knowledge to engage in the conversation in the ways in which the most impacted people in your community are asking you to.
I actually want one of those coats, but also thank you for saying that, because
this was made for me.
Dang. But nobody wanted to hear or be called on their racism once upon a time either, and people still are allergic to being called to race being called into question when there are discriminations and oppressive acts against our neighbors. So I think that there's never a good time to speak up and address oppression. The oppressor is never going to be excited and comfortable about not oppressing people anymore. But I didn't want to lose, and I know we're getting to our hour and I don't want to go too far past that, but I didn't want to lose Isabel and Pat's questions while we're here.
This is so great. I just want to say I'm hearing this invitation to figure out what defunding means, like to find lots of more language for talking about it, for listening to the people who are very comfortable with the term, just listening to understand life experiences, and then to make space for being uncomfortable. And I think those are 3 things that UUs can do in our communities. And I guess my question is maybe a very basic one, is what is a good way or a good practice to stay informed about what's going on? Like, do you have kind of a go-to media source?
So the one that I've been digging through, because I feel like it takes a long time, and I know Chelsea's going to have way more resources than I do, but the M4BL website, which Chelsea shared, it's so extensive that it's going to be like a college class for you. And so is that Breathe Act document. But if you take each piece, you can see how local governments and local organizers can make these things happen. It's, like the For example, the hiring freeze, which is now going to fund some of our local programs.
Thank you.
In terms of press, I just named a reporter to follow. Aaron Morrison is a national writer on race and ethnicity for the Associated Press. He covers the issue of defunding police and just racialized violence and systemic oppression across the board. He was the first reporter really to cover the movement for Black Lives in 2014 with true depth and insight into the history of organizing, so much so that Mike.com created an entire vertical about movement because of his reporting. So he is a trusted source. Other national press, Jamila King at Mother Jones. Democracy Now! Is a tremendous news outlet that covers systemic issues with a lot of integrity and a lot of truth. And I would also encourage you all to follow the work of Free Press. Free Press is a nonprofit newsroom that is based in DC, but has reporters all over the country who are committed to actually doing movement journalism, right? So like not falling prey to the untruth of objectivity in a way that allows for reporting to not actually represent the lived experiences of impacted people, but does have a journalistic foundation that is connected to the most true values of journalism around equity, truth, and transparency with a social justice lens. So their work is phenomenal. And actually, I would encourage you all to follow all of those people, but the Movement for Black Lives website does have a tremendous amount of information, not just about defunding the police and investment and divestment, but the other issues that intersect with that also have to be a part of that conversation about moving toward a world without police.
And then, thank you, Chelsea. Pat, you had your hand up too.
Just very quickly, I was involved as a mental health worker back in the 60s with the deinstitutionalization of mental health. And so when I hear defund, I respond thinking unintended consequences that, you know, let's get everybody out of the mental hospitals because they don't belong there. But we had nothing in its place. We had nothing to care for people, to give the service that they needed. So that, in a sense, I respond to some of the things that Chelsea is saying. As long as we have those other, I mean, maybe it's better to have nothing than to not have the mental health workers there, but I'm not so sure that, you know, in 100% of the cases, if do you see what I'm trying to say?
I have a personal interaction with that narrative myself, Pat, because my son Aaron has schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, and a couple of other comorbidities with that. On Monday this week, Aaron woke up in crisis, and he's been in crisis for a while. He called a crisis hotline. The crisis hotline called 911. Worthington police showed up at my door with 3 cruisers, 6 officers, an ambulance, and 2 firefighters. One officer entered my home and drew his taser on my son. Another officer would not allow my son to take his morning medication. He had just awakened, got hopped right on the phone and called his crisis hotline, thinking that that would help him. The medic that was on the ambulance or fire truck is the one who eventually allowed my son to take his medication. You're responding to a mental health crisis. You won't let the person take their medication. They referred to my son as the suspect. He's not a suspect, he's a patient. And you almost tased him in my presence. That's excessive. My tax dollars do not want to go toward that. I've actually worked in our own city with city council to ask them not to send that many police to my house ever. If I happen to not be here and my son is calling a crisis hotline looking for help. because we saw what happened to Joan Thomas when he did that. And police showed up and beat him to death. And now his family mourns his life. Mental health in this country was defunded so that police could now be responding to that. So the answer, yes, we had unintended consequences, or were they intended and were they systematically designed so that that would happen? So that's why we have to be prepared for what we will put in their place.
But it was unintended by you, is what I'm saying, is those of us that are saying we want to make a change, we also want to make sure that we're getting a better thing than what we've got.
Right. And that's why we want to look at what we're asking for instead. That's the reimagining that we need to.
I really like that. That made me feel better. That, okay, we're moving towards something better rather than just,
I think it's, having been involved too.
And as Chelsea put in the chat, we took people out of mental health care and now they're in jails. And now as we see, they're dying of COVID in there.
Right.
Sergey.
Yeah, it was massive. There's a case manager conference that was supposed to be nationwide. We supported in Ohio. I was part of that, for the children's part. But what happened after things were closed, these case management teams that were there for a short while went away. And that's what's so important to make sure if you defund the police, that the money doesn't go someplace else. Okay.
And that's why we're asking to reinvest into specific places. And that's why it's good to know what the Breathe Act says on that, because it gives you so many options for community programs that you can give the money to instead.
I agree totally. We had that back then too. Okay. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, I want to make, I know we're at time, but I think it's also important to think about the fact that there is no conversation about police in this country that does not also include the other agents of the state, right? That does not also include the ways in which systemic violence plays out, be it from education to healthcare. So when folks, and this is not to invalidate anyone's experience, and I really respect and honor the folks that have worked in healthcare in different capacities, but the conversations about the defunding of mental health care in the 70s were actually very different than the conversations that we're having now about defunding police, because the call out that happened during that time was not actually a call for us to reckon with racialized violence. We were in a particular conversation during that moment that was largely devoid of an acknowledgement of the fact that Black people were being disproportionately impacted. It was a very financially rooted conversation in a moment that had implications for people of color tremendously, right? Because at that time, we were seeing the moment that would lead to the war on drugs and to the moment where we saw the over-incarceration of Black people. So when we're having the conversation about defund, it's 100% like necessary to talk about the solutions, right? If we're taking something away, what is the alternative, right? And someone asked in the chat, what is a world, I would be very interested in knowing, like, what does a city without police look like? And my response is like, well, what would be the ideal city that you lived in, right? If something happened to you, would not your ideal situation to be to have a set of resources at your disposal that would come and immediately meet your need in a way that made you safer and not more vulnerable to harm? That is what we're talking about. And there's no way for that to happen unless everyone is actively engaged in re-envisioning that. And it's really hard for people to do that when they have never actually felt unsafe by the institution or made vulnerable by the institutions that we're talking about taking away. So there's automatically going to be some back and forth, and that back and forth is super healthy, right? But I know that for me, a city without police would look like one where if I'm driving down the street and I see someone naked in the street, I have someone to call to be able to come get them, to assess the situation, and then to put them in a situation where they can receive the care. This is a real situation that happened to me earlier in the summer. There was a woman naked in the street. People drove by her like she wasn't there, and there was nobody that I could call. And every social worker that I called said they're going to do a wellness check, and whoever calls for the wellness check at one of these agencies, they're going to call the police. Mm-hmm. And they're more than likely going to arrest her, at least for a period of time. So for us who are actually disproportionately impacted by this in a particular way, we're asking that we have an open conversation about systemic violence across the board, not just police, but how police are funded, how police are able to perpetuate harm, right? Because of a lack of healthcare, because of a lack of educational resources, our teachers are underfunded, people that work in social work are underfunded. So of course there's no alternatives, because all of the money that could fund our alternatives is being distributed in ways that keeps us unsafe, right? So that process is what we're hoping that you all can help us be stewards of, for people to be as creative as possible. Like if you dream of a world that doesn't have police, but that has social workers in every school, or that has doctors, right, that respond to mental health crises instead of police with tasers, then say that. Right? And think about the critical ways that we can help our city government move toward implementing pieces of that, so that our children inherit a world where there's bountiful resources at their disposal in ways that we do not currently have the ability to even really understand. That's what this is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm learning so much right now from you, Chelsea. Thank you.
I'm so happy we're recording this.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to go back and study it.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, I don't want to get us too far beyond our hour. So yes, Amanda, and then did I see any more hands before we close out?
Oh, I was actually waving goodbye, but if you while you're calling on me, I just wanted to say, I don't know if everyone on this call is super familiar with Faith in Public Life. And just what work you guys are doing and how congregations can work with you guys on these sorts of issues. I was just wondering if you could just maybe briefly share a little bit about Faith in Public Life and how congregations can work with Faith in Public Life on issues of reimagining public safety and defunding the police.
Sure. So right now, today, what I would like everybody to do is, if you are not on Faith in Public Life's mailing list, that you join it, because we're often doing actions that are targeting defunding police activities. And right now we are doing a push to action to reach out to Priscilla Tyson and Mitch Brown, encouraging them to join their colleagues on city council to enact this hiring freeze and redirect that money that is defunded from those salaries over into the community programs such as violence prevention and employment services that Councilman Harden mentioned in his amendment. So if you will go to our website, faithinpubliclife.org, you can find that there as well, where you can send that email, which we have drafted for you, to Priscilla Tyson and Mitch Brown. And just, if you're on our mailing list, you're going to get all of our calls to action to this regard, as well as, all of the other ones that we're doing that touch defunding, such as abolishing ICE and showing up for Miriam and Edith and all the people that are even indirectly impacted by this very important call to action. I'm also willing to have these kind of conversations with anybody that you want to direct me to. So if you email me at pthomas@faithinpubliclife.org, and let me know if there's somebody that you want to help understand what you're learning to understand tonight. John, I just want to address your comment here. And I think that's what we're saying all together. Back to the history of policing, we're looking at public safety and imagining a world that is not stocked with police who were set up to hunt Black people and lynch or jail Black people as a direct result of losing the right to own Black people as slaves. So it's important that we get a hold of that narrative and that truth, so that we can open our minds to be able to reimagine public safety in that way. Also, you can reach out to Dan, my boss. He's willing, and he also has a Wednesday interfaith justice table where we talk about this at least once a month, in addition to other ways that we can do justice as leaders of faith in this movement.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Chelsea, Paisha, thank you so very, very much. We are at our time, 8:15. Bless, what a wonderful conversation. And if I could put a period onto the sentence with another quick quote from John Lewis, because this one came to mind as you all were speaking, where John Lewis said, when you see something that's not right or not fair or not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. Most importantly, you have to do something. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Joan, for hosting.